Dr. Kevin Wallsten, welcome to Dad Saves America.
Hi, John. Great to be here.
So we got put in touch with each other, and as soon as I saw your project, I was like, okay, this is going to be a great and very utilitarian conversation for dads and families to have, and we can talk about the politics of it and all the rest. And that is that you are part of a team that has built a new college ranking system with the Manhattan Institute. I've got the list up in front of me. There's a bunch of surprises in it, but let's just start with you and with how this project came about. Tell me a little bit more about your background and how did you come to be involved in trying to create essentially an alternative to U.S. News and World Reports, which is sort of the default, where is this school in the rankings go to?
Yeah. So a little bit about me. I'm a professor of political science. I've been doing that for an embarrassingly long time now. Started in 2008. Really was not that interested in the politics of universities until I got involved in one as a tenure track faculty member. First couple of years, you're trying to find your way in a university. One of the things that I think is really important for people on the outside to understand is that academia is not like most workplaces. And there are a lot of reasons for that. We can get into it. But what I started to notice right around 2015, 2016 is that a lot of things that I had come to know about the university were shifting. Part of that, of course, was the student population. There were some things that were unique. Other people have talked about those extensively, people like Jonathan Haidt, Greg Lukianoff, and so forth. But I also noticed that the faculty was beginning to change pretty quickly as well. So these changes started to, force me to pay closer attention to what was going on with universities, higher education more broadly. And it was right about this time I noticed that people were reacting differently to me as a political science professor and as a professor more broadly. When I would tell people I'm a professor of political science in 2008, 2009, 2010, they would say, "Oh, that's interesting. That's great. Oh, my kid goes to this school or that school. Oh, great. Do you love teaching?" and so forth. And around 2015, 2016, I would get a different reaction. I'd get a lot of skepticism. I'd get a lot of sort of quiet reflection. I would get a lot of people sort of saying, "What are you doing? What are you talking about? How's that going?" You get a lot of people, of course, as a professor of political science telling you their opinions on things rather than asking you. But I noticed that there was this broad shift, right? That the public no longer seemed to hold universities in such high esteem, that there were increasingly complaints about the universities. Some of those focused on relevance, some of those focused on cost, some of them focused on ideological indoctrination. But as somebody who, again, I was a first generation college student, I came to the university, I found it incredibly enlightening and exciting and exhilarating. And I felt that we were losing some of that given the changes. And so I started studying these things more carefully. And I started writing a lot on the politics of Gen Z, the student population, as well as the politics of universities. I was shocked when I began one of my first empirical projects on DEI bureaucracies that nobody else was looking at this. One of the most dramatic and sort of visible changes to universities, the increasingly large and expansive diversity, equity, and inclusion policies and bureaucracies were completely unstudied. So I started developing data sets for universities, first tracking the extent to which these DEI bureaucracies were there, the effects they were having on students, the effects they were having on education. And that really led naturally to a sort of opportunity to work with the Manhattan Institute on producing a college rankings report that would really try to take a lot of different disparate pieces of information about universities and put them all in one place. It was originally kind of an aggregation exercise, a kind of 538 for those of you who remember that site, for higher education rankings. It was really an attempt to take work that had been done elsewhere and put it all in one place for interested parents and students. And then we realized, you know what? Even the work that's out there is not going to cut it. There's so much missing from the college experience, and we need to go out and collect our own data. So that's kind of how we got started. That's how I got started in it, and hopefully it's something that people can find value in.
And now a little bit about today's sponsor, American Hartford Gold. If you're a parent, You know the job is bigger than just paying the bills. Every day you're trying to teach your kids lessons they'll carry for the rest of their lives. Work hard, tell the truth, take responsibility, live within your means, leave things better than you found them. These ideas built strong families long before they built a strong country. One thing I've learned is that your children pay attention to what you do more than what you say. They're watching how you prepare, how you solve problems, how you plan for the future. That's one reason I believe in owning physical gold and silver from American Hartford Gold, the precious metals company I trust. No one knows exactly what the economy will look like 5, 10, or 20 years from now. Preparing your family for an uncertain future isn't about predicting tomorrow. It's about building resilience today. Gold has helped millions of families preserve wealth through changing economies for generations, frankly, for centuries. It's tangible, it's durable, and it's a great way to diversify and protect the savings you've worked so hard to build. American Hartford Gold has an A-plus rating with the Better Business Bureau and thousands of 5-star reviews. They can ship gold and silver directly to your door, or you can have it stored securely in a tax-advantaged gold IRA if you're thinking about the long term. And right now, when you call and mention I sent you, you can get up to $20,000 in free silver with your first purchase. Call 888-650-9836 or text DAD to 65532. That's 888-650-9836 or text DAD to 65532 or click the link in the description below. Because one of the greatest gifts you can give your children is the confidence that comes from being prepared and a stable financial future for them to inherit and build on. Okay, I'll keep this quick. Be sure to hit that like button, subscribe to the channel, and ring the bell so that you won't miss more Dad Saves America as our videos come out each week. And it also really helps us because when we reach out to guests, they look at how many subscribers there are to decide if they want to come on and share their ideas. So please subscribe to the channel. It really helps us out. And thanks for watching. Now, back to the show. So I want to, that was a super dense flyover. And I want to split it apart and understand some things. And I have, for those who've watched this channel, watched this show for a while, they know I've got strong biases when it comes to education and academia. And I'm hoping maybe this conversation can walk me off the cliff of wanting to basically burn a lot of it to the ground. That is partly nervous laughter. But in all seriousness, you point to this shift that you feel starting to happen in 2015, which is also when, Haidt and Lukianoff write first their article, The Coddling of the American Mind, and then ultimately the book. I recall an article in the left of center Vox with this teacher with his mouth taped, and it was like, I'm a liberal teacher and my students terrify me. It was something like that. That's almost exactly an exact quote of the headline. And you have sort of the great awakening, but it seems like it's hitting early in college, and it's hitting in ways that sort of don't make as much sense to the old school right-winger sense that college students are being brainwashed, because it's the incoming freshmen that are crazy, right? But dig in deeper there. Like when you say that you've seen changes, you saw changes happening to the student body, what do you mean? And then when you say you saw changes happening in the faculty, what are you talking about?
Yeah. So I'll say, the one thing that gives me some credibility on this, you mentioned Haidt and Lukianoff's article in The Atlantic. In 2015, I actually invited Greg Lukianoff to Cal State Long Beach, my campus, to give a talk on free speech issues at the university. Lukianoff had to decline the request because he was scheduled to give a talk that same day at Yale University. Now, it was that weekend when Lukianoff was giving a talk at Yale. He was walking across the quad very famously with Professor Nicholas Christakis and his wife, and they were sort of confronted very aggressively by some Yale students there who were complaining about Erica Christakis's sort of let's say, inappropriate view on Halloween costumes.
Right.
There was something in the air around 2015 that a lot of us started to see as
Yeah.
being a little bit of a departure from the old progressive politics that we had come to be very familiar and I would say comfortable with. Now, again, plenty of people have talked about this, but from the student perspective, you do have a heightened sensitivity and expanding definition of harm, more,
Mhm.
let's say, concern about the sort of questions that we talk about in political science or the social sciences broadly. A lot of those are going to be inequality based, right? This is going to happen really in the aftermath of things like Occupy Wall Street and so forth. So you have this sort of inequality frame that becomes dominant. You have that frame being ported over to debates about racial inequality, to gender inequality, and
When you've got in 2015, I'm trying to remember. I think the Michael Brown incident in Ferguson I think that might be 2013. So you've got the Michael Brown, Trayvon Martin, Black Lives Matter thing happening
yep,
by
that's right.
2015,
Yeah.
and that maps against the Gallup data on like the perceptions of race relations, which have like they're steady and high as of 2013, and by the next time it's sampled, which is in 2015, it's gone from like 60 to 70% of both Black and white Americans saying race relations in America are good to very good, to being the opposite. 36 or 7% say they're good or very good. It's a total crazy collapse.
It's a crazy collapse, and it's only really in hindsight, by the way, that we can sort out exactly when things change. But it's remarkable
Mhm.
the extent to which, basically, after 2012, you see this kind of inflection point where media coverage, the focus of academic research, the concerns of young people, and really particularly people on the left more broadly, really shift, and they shift very quickly. They shift rapidly, and it's not again until you have Matt Iglesias writing about the Great Awakening, you get some systematic sort of assessment of these trends that you really start to see what's going on. But right around 2014, 2015, again, it's just a sense a lot of us had in academia that we weren't teaching in the same context that we were teaching in before, that we could get in trouble. Now, there's partly a social media story about that. You get viral
Yeah.
instances of people saying the wrong things. It's partly a story, again, about different sensitivities of the student body. And back to the faculty story, I think what happens from a faculty point of view is that faculty are, let's say they're broadly speaking, not in every case, but they're very insecure, right? And this insecurity is a consequence of some dynamics connected to self-selection, the socialization process of going through academia, and the incredible competitiveness of the academic job market. So when you go to apply for a faculty job, a tenure track faculty position, you realize, you understand very clearly that you are going to be in a pile with maybe 200 other applicants, all of whom have PhDs, all of whom have been trained in ways that the previous generation of academics were not. You likely have a couple publications under your belt, and despite all of this, there's no guarantee that you will get or keep a good tenure track academic job. So we have the heightened competitiveness of the academic job market. And so you get a lot of new faculty members who are going to get their jobs, and they're going to be terrified of losing those jobs. And you put all of this together, again, a more sensitive generation of students, social media that can mob you instantly and get you in a lot of trouble quite quickly. You have a lot of insecurity in your position, in your jobs, and there's just a ton of pressure again to get on board with the sort of emerging message connected to inequality, connected to race relations, connected to questions of gender and sexual orientation. And so I think you start to get, again, a variety of different factors that are coming together at a particular moment to really change universities, change them profoundly, and change them quickly.
I think back to guest of the show who I think, I can call at least a kind of loose friend, Brett Weinstein, and his wife, Heather Haying, who, I mean, get hunted on the college campus of Evergreen State like they're animals for essentially just wanting to not be told not be pushed off of the campus during this a weird inversion of an already weird like ritual that the school had where like one day a school year, all the black people and professors would leave the campus so that everyone else would feel their absence. And this year, I think this was 2017 if I'm remembering correctly. So in this time frame, the new like administration's like, instead of all of us people of color leaving, why don't all you white people go away? And I was like, wait a second, this is slightly different in kind now. And for raising that concern that this is different in kind and it's not saying the same thing, Brett and Heather are hunted down like they're Nazis, trying like they're Nazis as the Allies sort of arrive at Auschwitz. I mean, it's crazy.
It doesn't take many of those events, by the way, to make many people who have to be in front of a classroom of students to start second guessing themselves, right? So, it's a lot of people might try to minimize some of the politics around cancel culture on campus, but again, back to my point, academic jobs are not easy to get. They're not necessarily easy to hold, good academic jobs, that is. And it might not take much to lose them. So if you see an instance of somebody losing their job for something that you find actually quite acceptable and reasonable, you are going to censor yourself. You're going to think twice, at least, about what you choose to assign, how you interact with students, the kinds of things that you say. Now, that might not even be that large a problem in a lot of disciplines, but if you're in a discipline, political science, sociology, anything that's supposed to tackle these issues directly, believe me, it's going to have a profound effect on the way you approach your job.
So you're voicing a perspective that I haven't spent as much time thinking about, which is empathizing with you people. As academics.
I'll probably give you plenty of reason to second guess that too, Gavin.
I went to Penn State, and I enjoyed my time in college. It was from 1996 to 99, so it was very much not just in the before times, but it was in sort of the later stages of the first wave of political correctness. So there was a wave of political correctness that young people today don't realize happened and then sort of got beat back. And like the first round of Bill Maher being on television was a show politically incorrect. And it was sort of in the aftermath of political correctness. And then it kind of came back and with a vengeance, right? Like quite literally with a vengeance. So I loved my time at school. I got a lot out of it. I encountered a little bit of like multiculturalism and some silly stuff. And I was in film school, which is not exactly like a hard science. But it was nothing like the kind of cultural Maoist weird experience that seems to be, I think, still mostly happening. How much of that transformation is about the teachers, the professors becoming scared of psychopathic students? Because it is psychopathic to like hunt down your teacher. That's like you're way beyond normal behavior there. And how much of it is the sort of total collapse of even the very small amount of intellectual diversity inside the academy? I was looking at, I know you referenced the partnership with the National Scholars. I'm forgetting the name of it now.
National Association of Scholars, yeah.
National Association of Scholars. I was looking at some studies they'd conducted, and they found that the ratio of professors in general was 95-1 Democrat to Republican. But that the donor dollars, so the number of professors who donate was like 250-1 Democrat to Republican, which I think is a more useful example because if you donate to a cause, you're more active and engaged. And so that suggests a total monoculture.
Yeah. Well, you're absolutely right. And I will point out that we were it was important for us in our rankings of colleges to take exactly that measure that you described there, which is campaign contributions, as a measure of the ideological and political diversity of the faculty. And it turns out exactly as you described. I mean, some campuses are different, but one of the most sobering statistics you can look at, by the way, is to rank universities by their faculty campaign contributions and see who ranks number one in most diverse, and then see what that actual breakdown is. And it's shocking. Again, if you sort of bracket a school like Hillsdale, take them out of it a little bit, you're talking even at the most, let's say, conservative campuses, the faculty donations are something like 25% for Republican candidates, and more like 65% for Democratic candidates. Now, you're talking about, again, I think there's two things here that are important. The first of which is, what is the sort of left-right breakdown of the faculty? How does that change over time? And we actually have some decent data on this. There are a couple people who have put a lot of effort into tracking this. Mitchell Langbert, for instance, Nate Honeycutt at FIRE has done surveys that ask these questions. And back in the '90s when I went to college, and it sounds like you went to college,
Yep.
certainly universities were left-wing dominant places. They were not some 50-50 split between conservatives and liberals. That's really not what universities have ever been. But you would take a faculty a ratio nationally of something like 2-1, where there's two liberals for every conservative, and within another 10-15 years, that's going to become 5-1. Now it's far closer to 10-1, based on all the data we have. And the thing I always tell people about faculty ideological diversity is, one problem is, of course, this sort of ratio liberal to conservative that complicates factors. But I think what is new, what is novel, what is more important is the changing orientation of faculty towards their jobs. And Eric Kaufman, the political scientist, has done some good surveys of faculty members. And what he asked them is, yes, where do you identify politically, left, right, and these kinds of things. But he also asked a series of questions. Would you be willing to discriminate against a conservative applicant, right? In terms of grants, in terms of peer review, in terms of hiring decisions. And what is shocking is that it's not just that increasingly faculty members on the left dominate the institution, but it's also that they are willing to use those political beliefs as a guide for deciding how to do their jobs. And so we have, again, some data here that was just released from Nate Honeycutt. He asked them, forget this left-right thing, that's important. But he also asked them, are you an activist? Right? Did you have, in other words, a professional hyphenated identity, right? Are you scholar alone, or are you scholar activist? Are you professor alone or professor activist? And according to his data, we have roughly a quarter of faculty members who view themselves as activists. Now, there's of course, large variation across the disciplines. This is a far more common identity, let's say a professional identity in some fields rather than others. The most concerning thing, and I don't know if this will prevent you from lighting the institutions on fire, as you said, but education, right? Education, which is surprising to some people, right? But it makes sense if you're familiar with this. Yeah, nearly 45% of faculty members in education describe themselves as activists. So we have this
45%.
Yeah, so we have this kind of, and you can imagine in STEM it's more like 10%. So we have this, yes, ideological monoculture in a way, but that has been coupled with a more activist orientation toward the job that is going to produce the university environment that we're now familiar with. Again, I can imagine a situation where we have similar levels of, let's say, ideological diversity amongst the faculty, but a less aggressively activist approach to these jobs might actually produce an educational environment that is slightly better. There are clearly issues with the lack of intellectual and political diversity on faculty, but I would say it's this activist component that has produced the sort of political problems that universities are really struggling to grapple with right now.
Well, I want to stay on the underpinnings here before we get into some of the rankings specifically and how they work. But we will get to it, I promise, because it's interesting and important, and it's a useful tool in a world where we as parents, I think, struggle to find credible tools to guide us through these hard decisions that we have to make about what should happen for our kids in their schooling. So education in general, and actually K through 12 in particular, is a huge focus of mine on this channel and in my personal life. My son Mateo has been through many different kinds of schools over the course of his life because we've been very active and experimented a lot. Waldorf, Catholic, Montessori, Acton, back to Catholic. I've told this story many times. I have heard it said, and I have yet to hear it refuted, that the education degree itself, the track you're talking about, so I am in school with an interest in becoming a teacher, that track is like the worst of the worst. And I want to lay out how I think of that, and then I'd love to just hear you really dig into the details of it, because I'm an ideological guy, so you can disagree and you can think, no, it's the best of the best. But well, let me start with a question. From your perspective as a teacher, what is the purpose of education? Like, what does it mean to have an experience that is educational?
Yeah. Well, I obviously endorse the idea of a classical liberal education, right? So the key components, I think, of a classically liberal education are to focus on the development of the individual as a whole, and to the extent that it was possible, we tried to represent these ideas within the ranking. But if we're going to be a free people, that's the notion of liberal here. People often get confused about what it means to be a classically liberal education. We're not talking about ideological indoctrination into contemporary left-wing politics, but instead, what we're talking about is how to govern yourself, how to exist as a free person in a free society. And that's going to involve, again, reference, in my view, to all of the great works of Western civilization, all the great ideas, all of the best thinkers that we've had the opportunity to learn from over time, that we used to use as a foundation for our curriculum in higher education, all the way up until, really 20 years ago. So the focus of education really has to be personal development first and foremost. This is going to be, again, partly critical thinking. It's going to be partly wrestling with the core questions about what makes us human, what makes us free, what makes us responsible, what makes us ethical. And, we can do this in a variety of ways, right? We can do this in a variety of disciplines. We can confront these questions in a variety of, we can look at them through a variety of theoretical lenses. So I'm quite happy to have a diversity of perspectives on this basic question. But I think the growth and development of people as critical thinkers, as moral and ethical members of a free society, and as a political scientist, I want people to be deeply familiar with the American political tradition, with the ideals and institutions of American government, to be familiar with the works of the Federalist Papers and the ideas that were underneath them, whether it's Hobbes or whoever. And I want, when our students graduate, to have a clear sense of who they are, what their role in the world is. I would like them to be employable, for sure. That is a key goal of mine. But I think if you have to focus on one idea, and I think that's incredibly important in education, you need a North Star. You can't serve two masters. And I think we must be focused as educators on this question of personal development, of growth, of intellectual curiosity, of encouragement to be critical thinkers, and of course, to feel a sense of efficacy as it relates to the world around them. Sometimes that will be politically, but not exclusively. It could be economically or in other domains. So that's how I think of it.
When you say feel a sense of efficacy, what do you mean by that?
That one can act meaningfully in the world. That when you choose a course of action, you are confident that it will, at least hopefully produce some of the results that you're seeking to produce through that. That you feel your views, your ideas, your thoughts, your feelings have, again, some. Some validity in the world, and again, that you are confident to proactively engage with the world around you, to not be to not be, sort of not feel defeated or to retreat before you even take on important challenges.
One of the things that I like to quote, having talked to a lot of psychologists on this show, is that one of the I think it's measurable-ish things that psychology has found most consistently most strongly correlates with happiness is a sense of an internal locus of control, that your choices actually matter, that you're not a victim of circumstance. So that's when I hear you describe efficacy, that's kind of what comes to my mind.
Yeah, and maybe you're familiar, if not. One of the things that is distinctive about Gen Z young people today is this sort of loss of a sense of efficacy, this sort of external locus of control, as it's often described.
Yes.
The idea that you're really just kind of subject to all of these forces in the world without any real hope of ever changing them. And this is, again, something that we are perhaps communicating increasingly through education, that I would say, again, a classically liberal education is designed to push in exactly the opposite direction. So
one of the other things about the universe, like how do you think about, how would you define what the purpose of a university is, or should be, or even was? Because I feel like we have a lot of posturing in higher education about its purpose. One word that gets thrown around like it's nothing, which is ironic, is excellence. But another is veritas, truth. These are slogans that seem like they've become hollow. But how do you think about what a good university education is supposed to do, and to what extent was it originally intended to do that thing?
yeah, I mean, as you point out, if you go through any of the old universities and just walk on campus, you can walk on Harvard's campus, you can go to Yale, you can go to Oxford, you can even go to some places, here in California, I went to UC Berkeley. You will see that all of their slogans, right, above all of the libraries, often the gates that you walk through on campus, have some element of light or truth. And we used to, I think, have a strong consensus that this was the point of the institution, that the point of higher education is to be this really unique and weird place where people can pursue truth. Now, it doesn't mean you're going to arrive at truth, right? But the society broadly understood that we need a dedicated institution for the pursuit of truth, a place where the usual rules won't apply, where you have this period of time where you're supposed to ask difficult questions, where you're supposed to, again, really engage with ideas that might be discomforting, with ideas that you probably are not going to be exposed to later on in life. But we had this idea, again, and this consensus, this notion that the university is a special place. Now, we get from this partly the idea of an ivory tower, right? That the work that's being done here is insulated from the outside world. It's of a higher order. It's why it's a tower. It's sort of closer to the heavens, closer to God. It's this elevated kind of thing. Now, I think, for many people in higher education, the insulation and the idea that you are above things has become really crippling and has led us to kind of a bad place. But we used to have, again, this idea that the university should be a kind of dedicated place for the pursuit of knowledge and truth and self-reflection and personal development. I think, as Jonathan Haidt and others have done a good job explaining, sometime again around this period that we're talking about now, it doesn't just emerge out of nowhere. There's a longer intellectual tradition. You can get into, again, people like James Lindsay who have talked about the sort of intellectual foundation, and we have,
for sure,
people like Haidt who have talked about, again, the sort of, let's say the generational or psychological or social factors that produce this change. But what we get is I think a kind of attempt to change this idea about what the university will be. This idea that perhaps we shouldn't be about truth, that what we should be about is something else. Now, again, in the space where we talk a lot about cancel culture, people typically focus again on the ways in which perhaps the ideological composition of the universities has changed. They've become captured, that now the purpose of the university has become a kind of pursuit of progressive politics, of social justice, of remedying inequality, or whatever. There were some critiques of the university as university enrollments expanded, as the idea that everybody should go to college began to take hold in the culture, that perhaps the point of the university is simply vocational. It's just job training, right? And we do have a lot of that that's reflected, even, we're sort of talking about rankings, but, this has always been a part of it. What's the point of going to university? And I will say, at my particular institution, I teach in the Cal State system, and we're overwhelmingly an institution that serves first-generation college students. And a lot of our students, you can sell them on the idea of personal development. You can sell them on the idea of seeking truth, but really, what they want is they want a good job. They want to be able to have a clear path forward out of the university to have a good life for themselves. And so I think, what we have are three competing notions of the university, right? We have sort of the students who might like to develop themselves personally, or confront great questions in the intellectual tradition of the West, or whatever. But in the end, they don't want to be saddled with a bunch of debt, and they want to have good job opportunities at the end of their college education. You have the faculty, who is increasingly viewing their job as the advancement of, let's say, a very narrow definition of progressive or left-wing politics, and their goal is to advance their own political project through a certain approach to teaching their students. And then again, we have these sort of older ideas again that have not gone away. Again, they're physically imprinted in the buildings, right? They're part of the DNA of universities. That what we need to be doing again is pursuing truth. And again, the only institution we have for this in a society like ours, right? The sort of epistemic role that the universities play cannot be replaced. And so we need universities to serve these three functions. But again, it's very difficult to proceed in a coherent fashion when you're attempting to do three very different things at once. And I think part of the chaos and disorder of universities can be explained by these competing goals.
There's I'm trying to think of what there's different ways to get in to cleave those apart and examine them. So I think the first would be, I remember this would have been whenever this was before I started. I got accepted into Penn State and decided to go there. But I remember visiting a bunch of campuses. I visited Penn State, Ithaca, Cornell, University of Pennsylvania. I was born in Philly, and I grew up in Eastern PA in Allentown. Lehigh. I basically stayed in the general area, drivable distance. There's plenty of schools within drivable distance. I didn't go look anywhere else. And I remember at one point, it was at University of Pennsylvania, meeting with a professor as part of the tour and asking, what kind of job would I be able to get if I graduate from here? And, and I'm 18, and what the hell do I know what I'm talking about? But I'm like, okay. He was like, do you have any questions? And that was my question. And he said, well, we don't really teach you that. We try to teach you how to think. That's the way we see what we're doing here. And at the time, my dad's a doctor and sort of an old school kind of guy, old school Philly Italian guy who's also a doctor and has a degree in chemistry. So smart guy, but also like a guy that taught me how to lay sheetrock and, get a door to be plumb in our house. He's like, what a bunch of bull. And I felt that way. And I will say personally, as a father, I would love it for the school to actually genuinely teach my son how to be a truly deep thinker, how to practice critical thinking. And I don't think that that's something to scoff at. that seems like it's at, of all the, like, the tension between like being academically minded, let's say, and vocational training. I mean, I actually don't think they're as disconnected as one might think initially, because as an employer, we have, this show is part of an organization that I founded and run. We have 20 people here. So I've employed lots of people over the years. I want like a well-spoken, clear communicating, crisp thinking, good writer who knows how to conduct themselves in mixed company, who can have a sense of what it means to be an adult in Western civilization in America. So all of that stuff's good. The greater tension seems to be between those two and the social justice activism thing. Is that how you think it? Like, because this one seems to cut directly against the other two. Like, I don't know what this one has to do with these other two.
Yeah. Well, the answer is nothing in theory, right? But in practice, they've been sort of forced together in this weird way. The universities have struggled for quite some time. I mean, again, just even before we got into this current era of the woke university, there was this ongoing debate about how can we do both of these things well at once. What kinds of things do we need to teach our students so that they are maximizing their potential as people, but also we're not hanging them out to dry when it comes to the job market. Now, I will say, hopefully this can give you more empathy for faculty members, right? I think one of the, I didn't realize that.
It's a noble goal.
Believe me, I did not think this was going to be what I was going to try to do. This was going to be my project for today, but apparently it is. I'll just speak personally then. I struggle as a political scientist because my students come to my office and they say, well, what can I do with a political science degree? And I've been asked it enough that I've tried to come up with a good answer to this question. But I've also struggled with it enough that I know that there is no good answer to the question, because a degree in political science doesn't lead logically to any particular career opportunities, right? It's going to be getting internships. It's going to be developing experience. It's going to be showing that you're a good writer, a crisp thinker, somebody who can communicate across mixed company and so forth. This is the skill set that you develop as a political scientist, ideally, but it's not as though that necessarily is going to translate into sort of any particular career opportunity. And I think one of the challenges we have with academia now, and there's a version of this that plays out in journalism. If you went back 50 years ago, a lot of journalists were people who had other jobs. They had different careers. They did other things in life. Maybe they served in the military. Maybe they worked laying sheetrock. Maybe they, were a carpenter or something. I mean, we had this incredible diversity of personal experiences within the field of journalism. And I think it served journalism quite well. As we become more narrow and specialized in our society, the opportunities to have, let's say, a sort of diversity within your own personal experience in terms of careers has become minimized. And, the idea is you're going to go and do something and you got to do it right out of college and you got to spend your whole life doing it. And that's certainly the way it is for a faculty member. A lot of people who go into professorships are people who have spent the vast majority of their life doing intellectual work. And they're people who, again, have had their eye on a professorship for a long time. And what this means is that most of their friends are professors. They're people in graduate school. Most of their network are people who are highly educated and in jobs, again, that require years of training and preparation.
Or at least they're heavily schooled.
They're heavily schooled, right? But the point is they don't have a clear sense, actually, of what today's job market looks like. They don't have a clear sense of what might help a student with a degree in political science, a BA or something. They don't know how to help. Right. I think there are a lot of people who wind up teaching students. And, this is less true, I think, at some of the elite universities, at the Ivies or something, because you're just dealing with a different student population. But there are a lot of people who would like to provide good advice. They would like to see their students thrive in a variety of ways, but they don't know how to do it. They don't have that experience themselves. They don't have the resources. They don't know. They can't open doors. And to be honest, they haven't pursued a career path that's replicable for most students, right? They've gone off to graduate school, they spend 8 years getting a PhD, and then they were lucky enough to get a professorship in some part of the country where they happen to be hiring that year. And this, again, is one of the challenges of being a faculty member is how can I best serve my students if you truly care? And again, I care, but it's not always obvious to me what kind of advice or help or guidance I could provide to my students in political science in terms of getting a job. So I think that, I think we have a little bit of a challenge when we're talking about what the point of the university is, when we're sort of focusing on this job component, which is most of the people, the faculty who are teaching students don't have any idea about what the real world looks like in terms of job and career opportunities. And so what you attempt to do instead is you attempt to say, how can I help this person? I'm going to try. Now, there's two components to this, right? We see this with massive grade inflation. The first thing is I'm not going to ruin their life by giving them a bad grade. I'm going to understand their circumstances. I'm going to try to help them out in this way. But the second thing that I'm going to do, again, since I can't provide much else, is I'm going to try to teach them how to be a good person. And my definition of a good person is what constitutes being a good person in this very, very, very limited, narrow social network that I happen to inhabit. And then we get again into sort of some version of ideological indoctrination.
Right. So the least charitable way to interpret that would be, I'm at Harvard, I'm a professor, I'm going to give everyone on average an A, which I think is now the average grade at Harvard. Yeah. Am I right about that? I think that's a correct citation.
Yeah. Mm-hmm.
And I'm going to teach you which emoji to put in your Twitter hashtag, in your Twitter profile, which will be a series of non-American flags.
Yeah.
The trans flag, the Palestinian flag, the Ukrainian flag, probably not the Israeli flag. That one's out now. But whatever, not American flags. Flags about ideology. I mean, it is funny because the flag thing. We'll get to UT. UT is near the top of your list, which I was surprised by. But I'm here in Austin. I drive through UT's campus, and I see this crazy flag that's like every garish color. It's called the Progress flag, but it's not just got the yellow triangle. It's also got some circle in the middle. It's like, how much uglier can this damn thing get? But the deeper thing with the flags is like the use of a flag. It's like capture the flag, right? The game capture the flag is you capture territory and you plant the flag to show that you've captured it. And that is what it feels like when I see these flags, whether it's on your Twitter handle or hanging above your university or at your coffee shop or over JP Morgan Chase in Manhattan in June, let's say, is like a conquest. And that seems to have been embraced so joyfully that it's just been without question of like, well, what does this have to do with this purpose of education? What does this have to do with all the not flags, but the like rock with insignia and statues carved 200 years ago about truth and justice? What about the whole like Lady Justice who's blind and holds a scale? Like, no, we got to wrap her in some other flag.
Right.
Like, is the worst opinion of this all basically true, that it's all just sort of whacked out ideology gone crazy? Or is there a better story here to walk me back? Is there a more charitable version?
Well, here's what I think is a charitable version. It might not walk you back, but it'll be charitable. I'll make no promises. I think one way of understanding what we've promised from higher education, right, is and this has been a long story. I'm sure you felt the pressure even in the 90s that in order to have a good life, in order to sort of accomplish things in today, in the 90s, is you needed to go to college. You needed a college degree, and a college degree would open doors. It would make you rich, and it would provide you with status. And here I'll sort of reference Rob Henderson's work, which I'm
Yeah.
familiar with. But we're
Yeah. He's been on the show. His book Troubled is just spectacular.
Yeah, and I think without getting too far into the weeds, I think what he identifies for us and is an incredibly important contribution to this whole conversation is that the role of status is incredibly important for people. And we've lost in some ways the traditional markers of status. And now one of the best ways to indicate whether you are high or low status is to signal to people along all sorts of dimensions connected loosely to politics. You pointed out one of these with the flags, right? It's a very clear way to signal to people that you're educated, right? That I know what these flags are. For instance, I know what these
Right.
flags mean. I know what they are advocating on behalf of, and I'm going to show these to you as a way of indicating that I'm educated or
Their totem on the totem
their
pole.
totem, yeah, and it's also a way of speaking, a way of talking, a way of self-presentation, right? And I think what we do for students, and again, I think this is an area where you see this across universities, elite universities, but even universities that are sort of less traditionally highly ranked, let's say, the ones that serve a different student population. Students come to universities because they want to stand out, right? They're driven, they're motivated, they want a good life, and they want again, they want the status associated with that. And one thing that they pick up on incredibly quickly is that there's nothing that is lower status than being a conservative. They pick this up almost instantly on campus. And the way I always tell people who aren't in the classroom to think about this is that there is this way of talking when you're in classes with undergraduates. And I always call it participation with disclaimer, that anything anybody says in a class discussion will now be presented with a disclaimer. And it's once you sort of see it and you sort of see it play out and you're used to hearing it, you can't unhear it. But students will always say something to the effect, don't get me wrong, I hate Trump. I would never vote for Trump. And then, they say something. Now, what they say is not even necessarily pro-Trump or conservative or right-wing or anything, but just as a kind of insurance policy that anything that's going to come next might be misinterpreted. They have revealed to their other classmates, to their peers, to their professor, whose side they are on. And this happens nearly every time a student speaks now. And this is sort of, again, the sort of rhetorical version of the flag, where what we're attempting to sort of not we but students and people who go through universities and get socialized into this viewpoint is what they really want. What's underneath at the core of what they're after is some idea that, no, I'm an educated person, I'm refined, I have high status, and this, I think, is the motivation under so much of it. And part of reforming higher ed is to, again, sort of break this association between, let's say, non-left-wing viewpoints and let's say low status, being undereducated, being misinformed. And again, so I think there's kind of an understandable motivation behind a lot of this. And I think if you could change the incentives, if you could change a little bit the associations that people have that are communicated through universities, that you can be a good person on the right, that you can have maybe conservative viewpoints that don't immediately disqualify you from polite society. If you can sort of push back against that, I think the draw of so much of these kinds of things, flags or disclaimers or whatever they are, would be reduced quite significantly. But students, they pick up on this, they realize this, and they think, you know what, I may be a first generation college student. I might not have a clear sense of what I'm supposed to do to elevate myself in society. And here's this professor in the classroom who's revealing to me quite clearly, and everybody else is saying, the way you do this, the thing you need to say is disavow yourself of any connections to the political right, and then you're welcomed into the club. So I think there might be this kind of motivation, which is if nothing else, human.
one of the things that I've noticed experientially is that there's an enormous difference between there being virtually no one around you that thinks differently and you don't need to have equal, but having enough people that might disagree that you need to take into account that they're probably there. And my personal example is this. I got out of school. Funny thing about film school is it's basically like a trade school, like architecture, like you're working on projects the whole time. It is like you're learning specific skills. It's less academic-y than let's say political science, although I would have enjoyed political science. I worked in television in New York City for a decade. I've always basically been a right of center guy. I knew that unless I knew exactly that the person I was talking to was at least even moderate, that I just couldn't talk politics in an honest way. I just had to kind of nod because it didn't turn out to be nobody actually, but the assumption was fair and accurate that I just can't have an open conversation here. My peers sure as hell can, quite loudly, quite vociferously, all the time, especially in an election year. But I couldn't. And I compare that experience, that sort of monoculture where there's a handful of people, but it'll be like you'll find out because there'll be somebody will slip and you'll be like, wait a second, are you voting for Bush? And it's like, and then suddenly you'd like scurry off, close the door behind you and be like, oh my God, I can't believe it. I finally found somebody I could talk to. I compared that experience to moving to Austin. Now, Austin's a deep blue city, but it's in Texas and it's the Texas capital. And I lived in the bluest zip code in Texas, but even there, the mixed company is mixed enough that the conversation's way freer. So instead of it being 99-1, it's more like 2 or 3-1. But everybody knows the Republican that they like that's a good person, and it's perfectly fine. Don't be a jerk, but it's perfectly fine. Is there, and this might partly your meta study of academia, but also like from a political science perspective, is there something like a tipping point where you go from being able to have toleration of viewpoints and pluralism to being a madrasa where you cannot? Like, is it like, whoa, so long as we've got, 2 or 3-1, it like the equilibrium holds, the center holds. But once you get past 5-1, the feedback loop goes into overdrive and it becomes 100-1 because only the most hardcore, almost cranky bastards are even willing to stick around. And next thing you know, you're in the pronoun Olympics.
Yeah. Yeah. Well, I don't know if that we've quantified it exactly, but the dynamic you're saying is exactly right. We have there's a very famous book called The Spiral of Silence that basically deals with this dynamic, right? That if you're the lone voice, there's only, and you can go all the way back to the Solomon Asch experiments about lines. I recommend for anybody who hasn't seen them to look up. There's some good YouTube videos on these. But you get a group of people, and you have them look at lines which are objectively longer or shorter than each other. And you have everybody go around the room. And basically, if you're the lone person who's willing to say that line is definitely shorter than the other line, odds are you're going to lie. You're going to self-censor. You're going to go along with the group. But if there's even one person before you who says, you know what, the rest of these people, even if it's 8 or 10 other people, the rest of the people, they got it wrong. I think it's line A that's actually shorter. You're far more likely to say line A is shorter. So it doesn't take much. It takes a few people to let you know that you're not alone. And politically, we have this. As a political scientist, what I always point to in my classes is that one of the things that's changed so dramatically about American society that can explain polarization. We often talk about political polarization, the parties drifting farther apart, let's say on policy questions, but there's also this affective dimension to it, right? Not just that you happen to be wrong about what the top marginal tax rate should be, but that you're evil, right? That I dislike
Right.
you, that you have all these bad characteristics. You're stupid, you're ignorant, you're lazy, whatever, you're morally bankrupt, and so forth. So we have these this increasing animosity towards each other, and that's coincided again with all sorts of decline. Let's say socially and interpersonally, we have the decline of transpartisan institutions. We have increasing residential segregation. So, what I point to is, I teach in Long Beach, right? This is LA County. This is I don't know. We could put it alongside Austin maybe, and we could have the Olympics for who's more left wing. But I would probably
You'd probably
I would
win.
bet on my team. No, but
Yeah, yeah.
you're talking about again a group of students that most of them grew up locally, and they've never met a Trump supporter. They've never met anybody who's willing to admit they're on the right, and this shapes everything they think and know about politics. Again, Long Beach, again, a couple generations ago, didn't have this political profile. California wasn't always this blue, for instance. Southern California has become highly residentially segregated in a way that a lot of other places around the country have been. So we just interact with people far less, right? We have churches. Churches, what are churches? I mean, their doctrine, their religion, their belief, they're all these kinds of things. But they're also places where people of different walks of life come together under a fundamentally non-political identity, right? We're all Catholics, or we're all Protestants, or we're something. And again, the decline of churches is correlated with this sort of growth in animosity. Labor unions, again, these were places where people would come together based on class interests, not on political interests. It might be Democrat or Republican, but we're still interacting around
Yeah.
this kind of
Civil society, the Shriners, the bowling league. We're
everything.
all
Yeah,
bowling alone. We're all bowling
that's
alone.
right. Yeah. So all this stuff again has fueled a lot of the problems that we're currently talking about. But when we see this again in the classroom, there was an interesting report that came out about students in the classroom, to sort of take this back to an academic context. Um, have you ever lied, right? This was a big study, a survey of students. Have you ever lied or misrepresented your beliefs in order to get a better grade? And it was slightly less than 90% of students who had said that they had misrepresented themselves in some way in order to get a better grade. And this reveals a couple things, right? It reveals the way in which students understand what they're being graded on. It reveals that they think very clearly. This was again lying in the progressive direction. They think that they are isolated in an environment that is left wing and progressive, but also maybe hostile to any individual opinion that they might have. And so this is all reflective again of this pressure that you're talking about, self-censorship, this kind of idea that there needs to be again a kind of model or an ally, or just something of a fellow traveler to encourage people to speak out more comfortably, which again should be the goal of a university. And what I've mentioned to some people in academia, look, it doesn't have to be the faculty becomes half conservative or half Republican. That's impossible. It's never going to happen. Again, people self-select into academia for all sorts of reasons that will never produce a 50-50 split. But if universities can support and promote, importantly, people on the right, and there are people on the right in universities, right? If they take their work seriously and they're not ashamed of these people and they don't try to minimize the work they're doing, but instead they sort of highlight them, center them, promote them, it would do a world of good, both for the students and for the public reputation of universities. One of the problems that universities have is that the public thinks they're completely ideologically homogenous, and that's never been true. And I'll just give you one brief anecdote. I do work on DEI, and this was an area again where if you would have asked me before I published some of this work, what is the faculty's opinion on diversity, equity, and inclusion, not as an ideal, but instead as a bureaucratic reality, as a set of administrative personnels and policies? Do they work? Do
Yeah.
they advance the interests of universities? All of these things. I would have said, look, you're talking about 99% of the faculty are going to say this is a great idea. We're all in. I wrote a couple of articles about the empirical articles about DEI's impact on university culture. There was a big change in course with the University of Michigan with their diversity, equity, and inclusion department. Nick Confessori at the New York Times wrote an extensive article about it. He interviewed me for the article, and it's just small little part, but this big article pointed to just the utter catastrophe that DEI has been at the University of Michigan. How it is.
I think I remember this article. It was like Michigan went
Yes.
all in on DEI, and it basically destroyed the school.
Exactly. That's exactly the idea. And what it did, again, is it turned every personal grievance into an issue of DEI. It sort of mobilized this massive bureaucracy for every kind of conflict you could imagine. Again, student satisfaction was down, comfort was down, self-censorship was up, performance across a variety of measures was down. They had spent hundreds of millions of dollars to advance DEI, and it had been a catastrophic failure that ultimately, by the way, led the University of Michigan to cast it out entirely. Now, this report in the New York Times was really, I would say, the first time that a reputable left of center news organization had
reputable.
Exactly. Yeah. It's all it's all relative. But
yeah, John Durante,
this is
Exhibit A.
but what the New York Times does, right? The New York Times functions as a permission structure, right? And if the New York Times is going to finally present some evidence that DEI is not working, suddenly what happened, again, my work that was cited in there, which many of my colleagues didn't know I was doing, right? But then they read the Times and they see it referenced there. And you wouldn't believe the text messages that I suddenly received. Oh, Kevin, I didn't know you're working on this, but I've long said we don't need to do X, Y, or Z. Or I didn't really say anything, but I knew this was all garbage, and I could see the problems. And suddenly, this sort of the floodgates open, right? Because again, the idea is there is this imagined consensus that is, sort of very. It can be very powerful if you're thinking about whether you're going to challenge it in any way. But as soon as there's sort of a crack in it, suddenly it's revealed to not be, let's say, such a strong consensus after all. And I think we've seen this with a lot of the changes in higher ed recently. You have. As soon as Trump gets elected, these things started happening. You get a lot of voices that finally feel empowered or comfortable to say, well, this was never my idea. Well, I never really liked this that much. And, there is a question that is begged by this, which is, why are people who cannot be fired, I'm talking about tenure track faculty members, so reluctant, so hesitant, so afraid of confronting the ideas that they are now admitting to be morally problematic and empirically unjustifiable, right? Even if you care, for instance, about equity as defined in the way that universities defined it, DEI bureaucracies do not produce it. So why wouldn't you even push back on empirical grounds? Now that there's some movement on this dimension, a lot of people are willing to speak up, but we need to, again, sort of start wondering why it is that faculty have not been courageous enough to fight back against what I think are a series of bad policy moves that have hurt higher ed, despite the fact, again, that not everybody is in support of these things and hasn't been for quite some time.
There's a couple aspects of the nature of being an academic or a professor that I want to explore, and then we can turn to the ranking system and then keep going from there. So the first one in everything you're describing that I can't escape, which is, I had some really great teachers and professors in high school and college. And the ones that I remember being great actually enjoyed debate. They enjoyed when you'd challenge and grapple with an idea. They like the entire notion for me of what it means to be like interested in ideas is to have that. It seems like lame, lazy, cowardly, and imbecilic that you would call yourself a professor and stand in front of a classroom of young people who are paying like $5,000 for your class and not actively encourage them to grapple with and chew on the subject matter of the class from every angle. Like, why are you even there if that's not what you like to do? So like, is that, I don't think that's being an idealist. Everyone I know that's like an intellectual likes that. So who are these people? Who are these people that are like, I'm going to go into academics and I only want my super narrow fringe politics to be spoken?
Yeah. Yeah. So there's a couple things I think here. I think you're, again, let me try to walk you back from the edge. I feel like you're inching towards the edge. Um, the first thing you have to realize about being an academic is that being an academic is a workplace, and you show up every day. You have your colleagues. It's an isolating job. This is what a lot of people don't quite understand, right? You have coworkers, but academics were once described as a loose collection of individual entrepreneurs, right? And you don't necessarily have a strong network of people who are going to be behind you and support you. You're not working collaboratively most of the time on a shared set of projects. You might have again department meetings where you talk about pedagogical strategies, but really you're there alone, and you don't want to create a workplace for yourself that is hostile or uncomfortable, right? And so what a lot of people do, I think, is they try to again figure out what the sort of dominant trend in their particular department is, the people they're going to interact with. And it's much easier to be quiet than to be in a fight with people. And again, it doesn't take much again to get you to voice your mind, but it also doesn't take many bad experiences, right? Fights and confrontations with people to dissuade you from opening up about what might be true. Anyway, so I think there's this kind of dimension to it, but you are right. I mean, ideally, what we should be doing as academics is pushing people. But I'm gonna refer back to this idea of activism as being a core identity for many faculty members now. I will tell you, I won't name anybody, but I've had colleagues who have said quite explicitly a couple different things, like the greatest political work that I've ever done in my life is teaching these students, meaning that my activism is wrapped up in my teaching. And again, if I'm on the left, then my point is to advance left-wing causes. It's the point of me teaching is not to engage or to provoke self-reflection or to try to get students to advance ideas on their own, but instead I have a political project and I pursue that political project through my job. They have said things again like the point of my class is to move students 2 standard deviations to the left, right? These kinds of things.
They say these things out loud to you.
In what they imagine to be again friendly company, right? And
Right.
this is very common kinds of these things you hear, right? Again, when you talk to
Now, I could steelman that.
Yeah.
In this sense, and I would say I'm guilty of the same thing, in that this show is a project of this kind, which is I have views that I think are closer to the truth. I try to explore them on this YouTube channel and in my work since I left Spike TV and stopped promoting Deadliest Warrior and started doing crazy rap videos about macroeconomics and having 3-hour podcasts about politics. But I fundamentally believe that the things that I believe are true, and therefore I'm perfectly happy and in fact excited to have them challenged and to try to make the strongest version of the argument. Because if I believe something's true, then I do think it can stand on its own 2 feet. And this seems like the difference between the concept of like Socratic discourse in pursuit of the truth and sophistry and like this sophistry, I guess, this like use of rhetoric for the purposes of manipulation. And I mean, that's the distinction I'm kind of hearing you say. And I could imagine a teacher saying, if I do my job and engage the truth, because 2 standard deviations to the left is the truth, my students will move there. That's the Steelman version. But the grotesque version is, I'm just a sophist. I'm Gorgias. And I'm going to use my job as a sage on the stage to just propagandize my students and manipulate them and cudgel them with my authority into adopting my position. And they're going to know they'll get better grades if they adopt my position.
Yeah, I think the distinction you're drawing is clearer in theory than in practice. And by that, I just mean I have no doubt that all of the people who are passionately attempting to move the needle of their students' political beliefs believe they are doing the right thing, that they are doing the good thing, that they are helping students understand the truth as they see it. And with that, I have no problem, with the exception of once it starts becoming, again, more explicitly activist, we have to understand as faculty members that we're not employed to be activists, right? There's no public support for, again, let's just take publicly funded institutions. The public is not eager to support our activism. The public doesn't want to sign on for a tax project that's going to channel a bunch of money into our activist pursuits, right? They are on board for educating people. And so we have a sort of professional responsibility, a duty really, to educate people. Now, here's the way this works out in practice. There was a nice study that John Shields did and a few other co-authors using the Open Syllabus Project. And this is essentially an archive of all of the syllabi that are being used at universities around the country. It's a massive data collection project, and it allows us really to sort of track for the first time the kinds of texts that are being assigned. Now, they have a paper on this. Let's just take the issue of race. And they look at a very famous book. It's a good book. It's a book I would assign to my students called The New Jim Crow. It's a very famous book about mass incarceration, about the changing racial politics, about really what happens after the civil rights era. The book is assigned in over 4,000 American classes during this last few decades, right? So since its release, it has appeared in over 4,000 syllabi. Now, if I were to assign the book, which I haven't done, but I've read the book, and I find it interesting. I find it challenging in some ways. But if I were to assign the text, I would feel a professional responsibility to also assign with the text some of the critiques of the text, of which there are many. And what was nice about the study that Shields and others did was they were able to look, when the book is assigned, how frequently is it assigned with criticisms of the book? Is it assigned as just, here's the truth as presented? You will learn it, you will come to know it, right? And you will, not be presented with any alternative viewpoints about it. Or is it coupled with criticisms that advance a different narrative about the post-civil rights era? They found that again, 3% of the time when this book was assigned, there was a work assigned alongside of it that could be interpreted as a critique of it. Now, again, you might say, oh, when the professor teaches it, they actually are teaching it in highly critical fashion and so forth. Maybe. But I think this is where you can start to see the difference, right? Are the readings presented as the beginning and end of the story? Or are we presenting readings and then presenting them alongside some very legitimate critiques? Again, it's not that every reading has to be matched with a critique, but certainly if you're teaching a book, and a controversial book at that, I think you have a professional duty, independent of what you think of the value of that book, to present it alongside some of the important critiques of that work. So I think this is where you can start to see what's really going on with universities. Are we attempting to advance truth? And again, from a Millian perspective, the best way to advance truth is to present truth alongside its critics, and then let the debate or the struggle between those two ideas persuade people, or are we just presenting the book? Here it is. This is how the world is. The one author basically nailed it, and now you're up to speed on the topic of race relations after 1965. And so again, I think it's very possible that I think it's in the vast majority of cases, people believe what they're saying. But you shouldn't let that belief in what you think is true shape the kinds of things you're presenting to your students. Again, in a perfect world, if I assign a text that I think is compelling, I'm going to try, hopefully, to assign a criticism of that, to offer the alternative viewpoint, and and see, let the students grapple with that and see where they come out. But I'm not sure that's happening enough, let's say, in the contemporary university.
There's another version of a steel manning I could try to make, which is, I'll be curious if you think this, if you think this resonates as an academic in the Cal system in political science. God. God bless you. So Fox News launches, and it has a self-evidently cheeky slogan: fair and balanced. It is not.
Right.
It is a right-wing news network. That's fine. There, when it first launched, it's like, oh, now there's one.
Right.
So why would they say fair and balanced? Well, you could argue that, look, in a world where literally all of the news, including the broadcasters, are to the left, and their newsrooms vote more uniformly Democrat than any county in the country, including Berkeley, which is true. Yeah. Having one network that's actually kind of right-wing is a balancing act. Now, if all you watch is Fox, are you getting fair and balanced perspective? No. But that's not the ecosystem. So if I'm a left-wing professor who sees my pursuit of truth as being to push left-wing social justice philosophy, is part of my justification that we live in a kind of right-of-center culture and the kids are getting conservatism from their parents, and so I am the left-wing Fox News to the rest of their life? So when they show up from Central Catholic High School or whatever, there's some little right-winger that doesn't know anything because they got those idiot parents that work in plumbing, and now I'm going to be the fair and balanced of the left. Is that an ethos that justifies this, like, it's okay that all you get from me is left-wing stuff because I'm the countervailing force to the rest of your experience?
I'm beginning to think you're actually secretly an academic because you're so you're getting into their mind so well. This is exactly the justification, right? This is exactly it. This is exactly right. The idea, again, the justification, the rationalization, let's say, of so many people is that they are the antidote to the poison of the rest of society, right? And again, they're I'm not. I think that most faculty members are true believers. They do believe what they're saying. They do see the problems, right? It's obviously, I think, unfair to describe them as sort of, grifters or some other kind of disingenuous term that would imply that they are solely operating out of a sense of political calculation that is I think would be deeply disturbing. They are again attempting to present their vision about what's going on in their area of expertise, but there is a sort of, again, it's a sort of collective action problem in a way, but our universities have become so ideologically homogenous that students aren't able to ever encounter alternative viewpoints or alternative perspectives, right? And I think this is one of the moments of self-awareness. Again, for in my own personal development, and this is a brief anecdote. One of the things that really led me to change my approach to teaching as well as my approach to thinking was I was working at Cal State Long Beach in 2016, and I was doing a lot of media. I was doing a lot of local news as sort of an election analyst. I'd go on 2-3 times a week, talk about the debates, talk about the polls, talk about what I thought was going to happen with the election. I was at that point so thoroughly ensconced, let's say, in a sort of progressive bubble that the idea that Trump would win was nearly impossible for me to believe, despite the fact that I'd like to fashion myself as kind of statistician, somebody who's empirical, someone who's data-driven, someone who's not susceptible to the same kinds of social pressures, these biases that other people might be susceptible to. But I would go on and I would essentially say the same thing every week. Look, this is open and shut. There's no way Trump's going to win. He has no path to victory here. Again, I'm sort of giving like my feedback on debate performances and such, and I couldn't escape again the sort of influence of my let's say narrow set of social interactions. And it was an embarrassment because I was actually working election night. And as I started to see things come in, I thought, I genuinely can't believe this happened. Now, a lot of people's response to that who were in my position said this confirms every bad thing that I ever thought about the country. My response was a little different. My response was, I can't believe I got this so wrong. I'm supposed to be an expert. I'm supposed to study this. This is my life's work. I'm supposed to have insight that's not accessible even to other people. And I'm going on television, doing interviews and telling people that no, look, this is the way it's going to turn out, and I was wrong. And it really forced me to reevaluate nearly everything that I was doing in the classroom, everything that I was consuming from a media perspective, every way in which I was thinking about American politics. And it was a transformative experience for me. Why did I choose that path as opposed to any other path? That I'm less clear about, but I will say that what needs to be true in some basic sense for people in academia is to again identify their jobs not necessarily in an activist capacity, but instead to realize we have a professional duty again to provoke critical thought. And again, even if you are very clear yourself on truth, ideally what you will do is let your students arrive at that through the force of the arguments you present to them, again, steel manning everybody all the way down top to bottom. And, when hopefully reality changes, when the things that you study happen in ways that you didn't anticipate, then it's perhaps time again to rethink your approach to your professional responsibilities. Again, certainly that's what I did. I know a lot of people in my position didn't do that. Instead it was kind of doubling down and realizing, no, look, in fact, the culture is right wing, as you're saying, and it's our job again to make sure this doesn't happen again. But this is an area where I think it's very easy to rationalize a kind of approach to your teaching that is going to allow you, enable you, encourage you to indulge your own political preferences in a way that I think is really hurting universities' credibility with the public broadly.
One of the things that I've gotten exposed to a fair amount of academics because I started off doing this kind of work in this world of ideas because I made these economics rap battles. And so I started meeting all these economists. They were all free market economists, so it was a subset. But economics is one of the areas that has the closest to a healthy ratio of like ideological diversity. Like it's got the lowest ratio of D to R, let's say, crudely. Anthropology being the most outrageously it should just be stopped. We should stop doing that now at this point. Like anthropology no longer is a thing. Sociology is the next one. Like just stop that, shut that down. It offers no value. It is just a wasteland echo chamber of postmodern horse. But economics has a bunch of good academics and they have to grapple with it. And when I was learning this stuff, there was like this robust blogosphere taking place that was really awesome. Places like the Manhattan Institute and the scholars like you, like engaged in this stuff. And among those people is Brian Kaplan, who's written a lot about this, including about academia, including a book called The Case Against Education, where he basically says the only purpose of education really is to get the stamp. It's not human capital formation, all this la-di-da talk of learning how to think, and there's no evidence for that. It's single-digit percentages for being able to retain the knowledge gained in a class unless you're super, super interested in it. So it's mostly kind of worthless. It's kind of a positional good. It's a status symbol. And so his advice was, don't spend a fortune unless you really, you're going to be a lawyer. You're going to be the best lawyer. You're going to go to Harvard because that's going to help you. And okay. But for the most part, don't waste your time with that. That's a waste of money. And like go to a solid state school that's affordable, and you'll be fine. And you'll get the stamp, and that will help you at least with that first sorting of the job market, where it's like, I'm at least looking for somebody that can finish something they started. And so here's a stamp that's, oh, you got a degree. You were able to finish. Okay, that's crude. It's probably the least, it's a highly empirical book. And in true Brian Kaplan fashion, it is otherwise unscathing. And he's a lifelong academic. Do you think he's basically right? Is he right that it's all just kind of a stamp? I know I'm sort of trashing your job, but no, is it sort of like, hey, if you get something good out of it, fine, but who cares? Just get through. Don't be brainwashed into a lunatic. Get the stamp and get the hell out.
Yeah, we've earned it. We've done more than enough to have ourselves be trashed collectively. I think there are a variety of functions that education serves. Credentialing is one of them. I think we have lacked any alternative to the credentialing system provided by universities, and so far up until this point, it has served us quite well. Right? I mean, it signals quite a bit. It usually signals a certain measure of intelligence, but more importantly, conscientiousness, the ability to stick through things, the ability to, at least for some period of time, remain committed to a goal. And it does serve a credentialing function. Now, I think there's an open question about what the credentialing function looks like in an era of artificial intelligence where, these things might not be the signal they once were. We saw even recently with some of the test results, the academic preparation reports from UC San Diego, that when you're not filtering effectively on the basis of the SAT, you wind up with a student population that's accepted into the university that is just sort of shockingly underprepared. And if you couple that with grade inflation, then at the end of this, what does it mean to have a UCSD degree, right? It doesn't mean much. So credentialing has been an important function. I would say the thing I think about a lot with universities is one of their core functions has been to provide people with a lifelong social network, as these other institutions of civil life have sort of receded, and we've been increasingly atomized, and people you realize college serves this incredibly important function. A lot of people will meet their lifelong friends in college. A lot of people will meet their partners, husbands, wives, whatever, in college. So I think it still functions pretty well there. And I think this is an area where a lot of residential schools in particular are really providing their students with a useful function. You get away, it's sort of a sort of journey that you go on to develop yourself in a way that you weren't able to under
it's a kind of social finishing school. You figure out some of the basic living on your own stuff under the very expensive training wheels of
right.
$50,000-$60,000 experience.
Yeah.
But yeah, I mean, no, you're not wrong about that. I think that's, look, I'm Mr. Critic. My older son is in university. So And that is one of the most important roles it's playing for him. And I think for boys especially, there is this like time period, right, between 18 and 24, where there's like this maturing of executive function, simply surviving to get into your mid 20s and having a chance to be better at speaking and writing and all those things is actually pretty useful.
Yeah. And
it's not worth 60 grand a year, but
but there's also no alternative for it, right? We haven't come up collectively with a good alternative to that experience, right? So, I think again, this is what we lack, an alternative credentialing mechanism. We lack an alternative, let's say, sort of venue for developing a social network and sort of getting out into the world on your own in what is a kind of less scary sort of halfway kind of house for entering into society more broadly. And the last thing, of course, which again Kaplan's talking a little bit about here, is the skills component, right? Which skills historically have been one of the areas where universities have proven their value. Again, I think that model, the idea that you're going to go somewhere for 4 years and learn everything you need to know to carry you through the next 40 for your career, that's an outdated model as well. The world moves simply too quickly now. So, you see the three value propositions of universities, right? Networking, credentialing, and skills have all been assaulted in various ways by developments in the real world. But universities are still in a relatively strong position because we don't have any good alternatives for those, right? We don't have any other way to signal to employers at the moment that you're going to be a reliable and trustworthy employee, somebody who can stick with the project in the long term and carry it through. We don't have good alternatives for training people, particularly in the hard sciences, right? For the kinds of work that will be done at the entry level for a lot of these positions. And we don't have any good way outside of universities for young people to meet with each other and bond and develop a sort of community that is perhaps distinct from the one that they grew up in. And so, universities, for all of their flaws, are the best of a series of bad options in a way.
This credentialing is a perfect place to actually talk about your project, which, because it is a credentialing mechanism and it's an alternative one. So you have at collegerankings.city-journal.org, we'll put a link to it, this project, which is a college rankings. And so right at the top, I'm going to just read the first 5. So if you're a parent, you're aware of the U.S. News and World Reports. That's the go-to, probably. This is very different. So just of all the schools you rank, number 1, University of Florida. Number 2, and we were talking about this at the outset, University of Texas at Austin, UT. So I was surprised by that. Number 3, University of North Carolina, Chapel Hill. Number 4, another Texas school, Texas A&M, the Aggies. And number 5, University of Notre Dame. And it keeps going. Purdue is in the top 10. Clemson, number 10. And as I scroll down, the first Ivy, I think I see technically, I guess MIT is an Ivy. That's number 13. Maybe it's not technically an Ivy. I don't remember, but it's a high prestige school. University of Pennsylvania, 17. You've got to keep on going. Princeton's 24. Keep on going. Yale is 30. Keep on going. Harvard, I think the oldest university in the U.S., founded in the 1600s. Number 37. You also have a star rating, 1 to 5 stars, and then a score out of 100. And the highest ranking score with number 1, University of Florida, is only a 71. So there's no one that's even made it into getting a B. So break down everything about how this works. What are the inputs, the star ratings, the score, so that parents watching can, and we'll clip out this section so that there's the quick find utility of this ranking, because I think this is really, really neat. It's super useful for parents. And you can filter for very selective, which puts which has some kind of criteria, and then most selective, which puts MIT at the top, which makes sense. I know MIT is maybe the least worst as far as like woke psychopathy of the high prestige schools, for reasons that make sense because it's engineering instead of gobbledygook social science nonsense. How does this work? How did you do this? What are your data sources? Go hog wild.
Wow, I've been waiting so long for this. Yeah. What we're doing is we're attempting to provide students and parents with a different way of thinking about colleges and universities. Again, you said the U.S. News and World Report ranking. That's the longest standing, it's the most popular, but we would also argue that it's the least informative, strangely. And the reason why is because most of the existing rankings are going to measure either input and reputation or output, meaning they're going to look at selectivity, SAT scores. They're going to look at things like do people in education view this as a prestigious university? Very famously, U.S. News and World Report has a reputation survey they give to academic experts that ask them to rank the universities.
That's an inverse indicator on the basis of our conversation.
That's what a lot of people conclude. Yeah. So
flip that. Who's last?
Yeah, that's right. They're also going to provide you with a lot of stuff that quite frankly doesn't tell you anything about what life is like on campus. They're going to give you how many citations does a faculty research publication get on average, or what does the class size look like, or some of the output-based rankings are a little more helpful, but then they're going to tell you what the median salary looks like for the alumni after 10 years, or they're going to tell you how many people get into a PhD program, or they're going to tell you again what the retention rate is and so forth. We don't say these things are unimportant. Certainly they should be a part of everybody's consideration when they pick and choose a college to go to. What we're pointing to is this massive gap that's opened up between the reputation of schools and the reality that most people experience when they go onto a college campus. The truth is that most students are unhappy with the colleges they choose. Partly what we wanted to do is help people, students and parents, make better decisions, more informed decisions about what life will be like on campus. We want to pry open the black box of the educational experience. We want to give people the tools for making a better, more informed choice. They shouldn't ignore things like reputation. They shouldn't ignore outcomes. But what they should do is weigh those appropriately against what am I going to be spending 4 years doing? What kinds of faculty am I going to encounter? Who are the other students? Are they politically tolerant? Do they share my viewpoints? Am I going to have fun? Am I going to enjoy the opportunity to engage in healthy forms of belonging? Is there a robust organizational life on campus? We're going to look at, again, things like the leadership, the administration. Are they going to be a thorn in your side throughout your time at the university? Are they going to support you? What we wanted to do, again, is take all of these existing rankings of the universities, not ignore them, not reject them, not dismiss them or disparage them, but instead to bring them into a new system, give them the appropriate weight, and put them alongside things that people really care about. And I'll just point out U.S. News and World Report. One of the shocking things about U.S. News and World Report is that its rankings almost never change. There have been studies of the U.S. News and World Report rankings and how universities move. You're talking about more than 95% of schools on a year-to-year basis remain in exactly the same spot that they were the previous year. Now, the only time the rankings ever change is when U.S. News and World Report changes their formula. They'll end up saying, oh, this thing gets 12% of the ranking rather than 14%, and then schools will move around a little bit. It is shocking for anybody who's been paying attention to the news for the last 10 years to realize that all of the things that have unfolded on the public stage connected with universities have had zero impact on the rankings associated with universities. If you pay any attention at all, you see that most of our elite universities, the Ivy Leagues, Harvard, have fallen into complete chaos. You hear these horror stories about what's going on campus, yet Every year, the US News and World Report ranking will come out and nothing will change. And the reason why nothing changes is because they're not measuring the things that are actually going on campus. Once you start taking every development on campus, every protest, every encampment, every cancellation attempt, every deplatforming, every time there's a new hire, every time somebody on the faculty gets appointed to be the president, every time some president has to testify before Congress and disgraces themselves, right? Our perspective is these should all go into a ranking system. These are all providing you with data that can be quite helpful in terms of figuring out what the best college for you is. And so what we've tried to do, it's a massive undertaking, is we've tried to build out a data set that will allow us to capture some of these things. This is our first iteration. We're going to expand, but we have 68 different variables in our ranking system. That's more than you'll find in any other ranking system by quite a bit. And importantly, some of those variables are exactly the same variables you're going to see in US News and World Report, in Forbes, in the Wall Street Journal's college rankings, in Washington Monthly's college rankings. Again, we're taking the best of what those other approaches have done, and then we're supplementing them with all sorts of measures that you can't find anywhere else. So we think it's very important for prospective students and their families to know how committed a university is to meritocracy. And so we have a variety of measures for how committed the university is to meritocracy. We're going to measure the size of the DEI bureaucracy. How intrusive is it? How committed to race-based admissions and hiring are the universities? Do they require faculty to make a diversity statement when they apply for a job? Did they write an amicus brief in the affirmative action cases, SFFA versus Harvard and UNC, in favor of taking race into account in university admissions? We're going to include all of that stuff in our measure to, again, to give students and their families a sense of what's going on here. We're going to
And just for those that aren't familiar with that case, because beating up on Harvard is a personal hobby horse of mine, this was a case in which if I remember correctly, the plaintiffs were Asian Americans, or on behalf of Asian Americans, who were actively discriminated against by Harvard very explicitly, because Harvard was like, we have too many Asians, basically. And there was even a way to talk internally of like noticing if someone seemed Asian, which is really like a way of saying like somebody who seems smart. It's like, oh, what do they have, a high math score? Might be an Asian, get him out of here. So
yeah. Yeah, this was exactly the root of the issue, right? Is that you could look again at admissions rates by race and academic performance measured by the SAT and incoming GPA and so forth, and there were a variety of ways this showed up. But one of the things that Harvard was doing, for instance, was systematically scoring Asian applicants lower on their personal qualifications, even in the absence of any hard data about those personal qualifications, things like in-person interviews or anything. And this was the case very famously, though, where the Supreme Court decided that affirmative action university admissions would no longer be allowed, right? And so up until that case, the Supreme Court had ruled that diversity was a compelling educational interest for universities to pursue, such that they might take race or ethnicity into account. The Supreme Court cast aside that decision in SFFA versus Harvard, but it was really revealing, let's say, to see which universities came out hard in support of continuing race-based admissions considerations, and we took that into account. We think it was really important for students and their families to know: am I going to a university that lobbied the Supreme Court on behalf of continuing race-based admissions? And again, it's not like our rankings are totally determined by that factor, but we think it's one factor that is important in itself, but it also reveals something about the leadership of the universities. So we've tried to include those things. We've tried to also include measures that you can't find elsewhere, things like the extent to which the faculty is ideologically diverse. Now, again, we talked about campaign contributions. We track that. We have surveys of student perception, right? Do the students experience their faculty as being far left or far right, for instance? We've also taken organizations that are committed to heterodoxy within the academy. So here we're talking about organizations for people who are committed to a certain view of the university, right? Faculty can join these. They're free to join. And we've looked at How many faculty members at each campus, for instance, have joined the Heterodox Academy, have joined the Academic Freedom Alliance, right? We've used that as an indicator for what the school is like. We also measure against student political ideology. If you're a conservative student, or if you're even a liberal student, this is one thing I always point out is, like, if you don't like our list, you don't like our value judgments, it's quite easy for you to use our rankings to your advantage still. For instance, I was talking to one of my colleagues and said, well, you have all this stuff about DEI. We have this labeled under a category, commitment to meritocracy. And we rank schools based on how committed they are to meritocracy, based on whether they have the SAT as part of their admissions, whether they have extensive DEI bureaucracies, whether faculty members are required to do diversity statements when they apply for jobs, and all these kinds of things. And we rank the schools, and people who come to our site can see this. We rank each school, not just overall, but based on their commitment to meritocracy. So if you're somebody who says, I hate meritocracy, we'll just go right down to the bottom of our list. There you can see my alma mater, UC Berkeley, right at the bottom. And you can go to UC Berkeley again. So, what we tried to do again is be transparent about our methods, but cast a very wide net. The transparency, coupled again with the sort of broad array of factors that we're looking at, hopefully will provide students and their family members with a perspective on these schools that they're just not getting elsewhere. Again, a lot of people might overlook University of Florida because it's usually ranked around 30 in U.S. News and World Report. A lot of people might not take a school like University of Notre Dame seriously. A lot of people might not have on their radar a school like Clemson. And what we're saying is, there's a good education to be had at these schools. There's a lot to recommend these places. And if you're somebody, again, who cares about things like intellectual pluralism, if you care about the extent to which there will be support for hearing dissenting viewpoints, if you care about the outcomes, the return on investment for your education, you care about attending a university that has strong and committed leadership, then our rankings are probably going to be helpful to you in terms of navigating what is an increasingly complicated higher education environment.
What a cheeky question I'm going to ask just for my own personal enjoyment is, how do you take into account if, let's say, our oldest university makes a sort of vicious plagiarist who's actively tried to destroy some of the most prominent intellectuals at the school, their president?
Yeah.
I'm speaking, of course, of Claudine Gay, who was a ridiculous plagiarist and also tried to destroy Roland Fryer, one of the most interesting academics at Harvard.
Yes.
And deserves to constantly be reminded this is a terrible, terrible, bad actor that was made president, and I think still pulls like $1 million salary while no longer being president. Yeah. So how did that fit into your rank? Do you have a Claudine Gay factor? Is it like the Wilsonian factor? Like, are you like Woodrow Wilson and you get a 1 out of 5?
No, I wish we did, actually. We struggled a lot because in terms of capturing these things. Our goal is to capture exactly these kinds of things, right? Now, one of the challenges of doing our rankings is, you need to be, I think, systematic, and we wanted to be quantitative and empirical, and we wanted to be transparent. And it's hard, again, to quantify a lot of these things across, in our case, 100 universities. I would argue that the kinds of things you're talking about, Claudine Gay is just one example, right? But every time there's some sort of, again, embarrassing behavior on the part of a university president, of which there are many, every time.
And that cuts to the core of actual, like, the purpose of the university. So I'm calling her out not just because it's a scandal, but because it's a scandal that cuts to like a philosophy and a mode of handling the academic enterprise that is fundamentally corrupt and evil.
Right. Yeah. And what our argument broadly is that any good rankings, any rankings that you should bet your kid's future on, your own future on, should take that into account in some way. Now, with that said, we have not done that in this iteration, but we get much closer to those things than any other ranking system even tries to get. Again, US News and World Report, not to beat up endlessly on them, but they're the sort of dominant source for so many kids, so many parents. They have no way of capturing any of this in their rankings. Again, they're just going to take these sort of basic institutional level variables coupled with some measure of reputation from academic experts, and they're just going to reproduce the same list of schools that they've been producing again since the 1980s.
Yeah, I mean, I pulled them up. No shocker here. Number 1 is Princeton. Number 2 is MIT. Number 3 is Harvard.
Yeah.
And I'm sure we know. I'm sure it's not hard to imagine when you go further down. Princeton, MIT, Harvard, followed by Stanford, Yale, University of Chicago, Duke, Johns Hopkins, Northwestern, University of Pennsylvania, Cornell, Brown, Dartmouth, Columbia. Essentially the dirty dozen of schools that populate the top institutions with flag wavers. Right. And not the American flag.
Yeah. That's right. Yeah. But none of these, again, nowhere, again, this is a sort of baffling document to look at if you've been paying attention to the news. If you see things reported about Harvard or Princeton or, again, any of the Ivies, you think, how can this possibly be? This is a complete disconnect between my sense of what's going on these campuses and what U.S. News and World Report is telling me. Our ranking, again, is an attempt to quantify some of the craziness, but not just the craziness. We're attempting to reward schools that have taken the challenges of the last 5 years and attempted to reform themselves in a direction that's going to better serve their students, or to better serve the promotion, again, of a high quality educational experience. We're attempting to point to schools that are doing things that are innovative and productive at a curricular level, for instance, and we're attempting to point out to prospective students, their parents, their families, to say, look, we do not want you to paint with too broad a brush. I think this is one of the major challenges that confront parents today. They might look at the news, and when you look at the news, you're going to see the elite schools, you're going to see the prestige schools, you're going to see Harvard, you're going to see Stanford, you're going to see Princeton, you're going to see Yale, you're going to see all of these big names because they get covered a lot. And your impulse might be to say, you know what? I don't need to go to school after all. There's nothing there for me. And what we're attempting to do is point out to people that there's still a good education out there to be had. You can still go to places and find a really, really valuable and rewarding educational experience. Now, as you point out, no place is perfect. There's work to be done everywhere. We had 0 5-star schools in our 100 schools, right? We only had 2 4-star schools. We had University of Texas, Austin, University of Florida. We have 60 schools that are.
It is really interesting that the sort of more qualitative element of that, it does show it's like this, it's not quite tallest pygmy, but kind of. It's like the best is still got a 70% on the test.
That's right. Yeah.
You're not great. It's not Harvard. Everyone doesn't get an A on your rank.
Exactly. Yeah, exactly. And we set up our, you have to decide formulas and so forth. We were open to the idea that a school could receive 100. We didn't want to rank it in relative terms where just because you happen to be the best, you would get all of the points allocated. We wanted to hold schools to an objective standard. So when we compute these scores, we're saying not are you better than the rest, but are you good relative to our idea of what a great university would look like? And, in some ways, some schools do that. If you look, again, we're talking about commitment to meritocracy. If you look at University of Florida, they get 10 out of 10 on commitment to meritocracy. They're not incorporating DEI into their faculty hiring process. They're not subject to an extensive DEI bureaucracy, partly as a result of decisions from the legislature. Right? They're doing a lot of they require the SAT as a mechanism for identifying who will do well at the university. These things are important. So we're open to schools getting an A, let's say, to sort of acing the exam. None of them are doing that. And what we would like to do is point out to schools that partly through the transparency of our rankings, is there are ways you can move up the list. There are very clear reforms that you can start pursuing right now that will help you improve the quality of the education you're getting. And, if the ranking is working well, this is going to lead to a little foot voting, right? There's going to be students who maybe start applying to University of Florida or UT Austin or University of North Carolina who previously might have not considered those schools. And if universities begin seeing that they're actually losing quite a bit for their embrace of whatever it is at a curricular level, DI required courses, or if they're losing by not having an ideologically diverse faculty, or they lose because they're constantly giving in to student protester demands for canceling speaking events, or any of these things, right? They're gonna pay a cost for that, and so ideally, again, we're pointing out to schools where they can improve, and students who pick and choose strategically with the right information will provide the incentives required to get universities moving in the right direction again.
I have had a couple guests on the show who I also consider friends, Mike Munger over at Duke, and Carlos Carvalho, who was at UT and is now the president of the new UATX University here in Austin. And one of the things in talking to Carlos, frankly, about what might be a less talked about element of the university problem. And I'd be curious what your perspective is on this, because I don't have some deep wisdom, knowledge of this. It does seem like there is a governance problem in the university as an institution, in that, and I can only make a super broad claim that I'm open to pushback on, which is true of everything, but especially this. In a firm, especially smaller firms, but even large firms, leadership matters a tremendous amount. It really actually does. Certainly in small, you're making decisions that impact everyone. And if you're small, you're making them in a relatively fast-moving environment. But even in a large organization, you ultimately make decisions that affect everything. Like, I love Steve Jobs. He's one of my heroes. God rest his soul. I think what he did when he came back to Apple, it's like a textbook example of how leadership can fundamentally transform even a large or publicly traded company. From the verge of bankruptcy to being on a track to being one of the most important companies in the world. That doesn't seem to be the way executive function works inside the university. It is some kind of, it appears to be this highly diffuse governance by committee, which is properly understood always as an insult. Decision by committee is always an insult, justifiably so. And so how much of that is part of the problem? The kind of just like molasses covered morass of like non-leadership, pass the buck, board of regents, governance by committee, being afraid of your faculty, just like, who the hell wants that job? I can't get anything done. I can't affect change. Am I capturing it correctly with my scold? Is that what it is?
I think that's I think you basically nailed it. There's a lot that goes into it as well. I mean, the thing is, most university presidents, we sort of imagine them as being integral parts of the university community, and in some ways, that's not entirely their job anymore. They're mostly public facing rather than university facing in a lot of senses, and they're not necessarily evaluated in terms of how well they develop the curriculum, how much they encourage, student growth or anything like this. They're usually in the job for a very short period of time. They're not people who are lifers. They're not people who are staying there. But that's in contrast to the faculty who basically never leave. Right? You're appointed as a tenure track faculty member, you get tenure, and then you're kind of there. And so, the faculty really hold the power. There's all sorts of, again, justifications for this related to academic freedom and faculty self-governance and so forth. And it's a job that's not that appealing to a lot of people. So I don't know that it attracts, the sort of Steve Jobs character that would really be excited about an opportunity to move an institution in a particular way, because again, these are not necessarily powerful positions or powerful roles, and you're subject to critique from all sides, right? You're public facing, and the public's going to beat you up for what the faculty is doing, but you can't replace the faculty, right? You have no control over who the faculty chooses to hire, or who's going to remain on the faculty, or the kinds of decisions that faculty make about curriculum. You can't control the students in any meaningful sense, right? If the students decide to go nuts and light something on fire, flip a car over, I mean, you can come out and issue a statement, but there's very little that you could do in practical terms to prevent a lot of what goes on university campuses. So I don't think it's that appealing of a job for a lot of people. I think when you look at our rankings, what you sort of begin to understand, though, is that the universities that perform the best, and we would argue the universities that are making the most important strides in terms of reforming higher ed, are actually universities that are forced to implement, or at least work with, conservative legislatures, right? If you look at our
UT.
if you look at
Good old UT.
yeah, we have UT, and again, to a lesser extent, we have University of North Carolina, and we have, again, Florida is not exactly, the exact same dynamic, but we have, again, some political accountability and input into the governance of universities. Historically, I think faculty have interpreted this notion of academic freedom to mean faculty self-governance. That's kind of the sort of end by itself, is that faculty are allowed to govern this institution as we see fit. We're the experts. We will decide what students learn. We will decide who gets hired. We will decide how our courses are conducted. And anything that begins to smack of political interference from the legislature, the governor, or anybody else, quite frankly, even the president often, is an infringement upon our academic freedom. And that's fine in a way until...
Yeah, it's fine so long as you're not taking any of my money.
Yeah, in fact, it's fine. That's exactly right. It's fine insofar as you are not, again, sort of taking the taxpayers' money and, importantly, doing whatever you want with it in a way that the public fundamentally disagrees with, right? So this is...
Or is counter to your public-facing claims, which would constitute, essentially, at least in the spirit, fraud.
Right. To put it a different way, yeah. And so, again, I think what we're going to see is an increasingly contentious set of debates about what is academic freedom and what is the role of the taxpayer exercised through elected officials in governing universities. Again, this was an issue that didn't really come up. It wasn't as salient before universities became so politically mobilized, right? So clearly identified with one side of the political spectrum. And so we've sort of brought this upon ourselves in a way. But what we've seen, at least in the universities that we've looked at, is there is something that can be productive about the interplay between a university with all of its warts and all of the things that we've been talking extensively about, and the legislature, which is going to look out for the taxpayers' interests, which is going to have its own idea about what universities should look like. And that can produce, again, innovation, where innovation would never occur really if the faculty were left to their own devices. One of the things that we were very serious about measuring is whether the school had a sort of dedicated program, really a department of civic thought or civic learning or civic leadership. Now, these things have been cast in some ways as kind of right-wing efforts to, sort of impose ideological or viewpoint diversity on a faculty that was reluctant to pursue it on its own. But really, what these have in reality, as they played out, is they've actually received bipartisan support in many instances. They've been quite productive and successful from the students' perspective. And again, these are programs that just never would have got off the ground if not for the legislature being being willing to fund them, of course, but also to in some ways impose them on a hesitant university. So we have those at Arizona State, we have them at UT Austin, we have them at University of Florida, University of North Carolina, we got one at Ohio State. Yale announced that they're starting one. Again, partly because of the success of these other programs. So I think, there is this opportunity that's been imposed on universities to begin to work with the legislature to figure out ways of making the university serve the public more broadly, more effectively.
It's a very, so I would consider myself, when it comes to what should the role of government be, let's say, to be very much a libertarian, which is like, I'd like the answer to be as close to zero as possible on any given question by default. If it's like, what does Popola think the government should do about X? Insert your issue. Saying nothing is almost always going to be a correct answer for me. So that interplay you're talking about, I find really fascinating because it's a kind of second best solution. Because you've got this thing called the university, which has federal grants, research grants, which get capitalized and monetized by the universities because money's fungible. So they get all this money for research, most of which is unreproducible garbage anyway. I mean, like the replication crises across the board are all horrible. So here's a paper about something that no one will be able to reproduce. Great. How much did it cost? A couple $1,000,000? Wonderful. So that just funded your staff. That's what that was. You've got the actual monopolized subsidization of student debt by the government. So that's all a government scam, which has been capitalized. So you get lazy staff and lazy rivers for $1.8 trillion in debt. Not my favorite thing. I'm ranting now, but that's okay. And then you have the state, so the state schools, which get state money. So this is a fundamentally political animal, even the private schools, if they accept government loans and government research grants. And then there's a ratchet effect, which is, okay, so given that we've got all this government money and our whole staff is explicitly political in one direction, which seems like about as literally the definition of corruption as the teachers' unions, which are definitionally corrupt and should be abolished and banned. Because they have a skin in the game of getting more money for themselves at all of the rest of our expense, which we have no say in. So that all sucks. And now you say, okay, so now we're going to have the politicians kick these bastards in the teeth to at least have one Republican thing on their campus filled with pride flags. I know I'm being uncharitable here, but the irony is I'm happy for all of that because the alternative on the right, broadly, let's say, has been something that I don't think is tenable, which is, let's pretend we have this abstract idea of academic freedom while we're funding it all coercively. But anytime there's like an attempt to have this thing we're funding not be a communist fifth column in our society that wants to destroy it, oh no, academic freedom.
Right.
And Greg, I consider Greg Lukianoff to be a friend and compatriot, but they're kind of guilty of this. They do this stuff. They're like, no, academic freedom. It's like, no. You can have your academic freedom when you don't take a nickel of my money by force. Then you can have your academic. You don't get to be tenured at my expense to want to burn this society to the ground. Why do you think that that's like it seems like the right-wingers are like late to the game on this. It's like you guys, Chris Rufo, but you get all this pushback, like, oh, what about academic freedom? It's like, as a political scientist, how do you analyze that phenomenon on the right?
Yeah, well, I think basically what you said is I think fairly unobjectionable, right? In some basic way. I mean, I think what has been there's been kind of a hiding of the ball here, which is the role that the taxpayer is playing here, right? Is that we haven't understood properly, I would say, universities as being the public projects that they are. There's I think been a way in which we've been immune from criticism up until recently, that we've sort of we've been held in such high regard by the public. Again, you can track this with Gallup surveys. It really isn't until 2015 that the public reputation of universities begins to deteriorate so dramatically and so quickly. And now again, you're talking about us as higher education, being an institution that people are fundamentally skeptical of. I mean, the Gallup data shows it's not just Republicans, independents, and even Democrats have become less trusting and confident in institutions of higher education. So I think what happened for a long time is that universities were sort of skating on the goodwill of the public, that the public held higher education, colleges and universities, incredibly high regard. They viewed us as institutions that were, holding again this sort of very cherished and important place in our society. That everybody wanted their kids to go there. Many people who went there had tremendously positive experiences.
Oh, the clutching of the graduation rings
Yeah.
among even our
Yeah.
friends is often like, I'm so worried. I sent my kid off to school. They came home over Thanksgiving and they hate me. Anyway, when are we going to the football game?
Right. Yeah. And this is really hard for people to come to grips with, that the school they went to, even just the sort of physical place that they might go back to on Saturdays, right, for the football game, has been transformed. It's unrecognizable, right? It's hard psychologically to come to terms with this. And so for a lot of people, especially donors, right? Donors do not want to hear a lot of this, right? They want it to be that, the money, the school that the money they're giving the school to is being used in this way or that way. And it's just going to, again, give kids who are there now the opportunity to have the experience they had. Again, those days are gone. And catching up with that, coming to terms with that, I think, has been the main impediment towards reforming institutions in the way they need to be reformed. Now, again, why has there been no political pressure? Again, it's precisely because of this. Again, you look at state legislatures. State legislatures are populated with people who went to these schools. I mean, one of the things that state legislatures, you take any big state legislature. I mean, I'm sure this is true in Texas. Most of the people who are serving the state legislature have some experience with the higher education system of the state of Texas, right? It might be UT Austin, might be Texas A&M, might be University of Texas El Paso, or any place, right? But they don't. Again, it's hard for them to realize that these institutions have perhaps strayed too far from their missions, and they become things that are no longer willing, or are no longer worthy, let's say, of our goodwill. And so I think this is why it's taken a little bit of time. The sort of uncovering of what's really going on at universities has been a slow process. You mentioned the work of Chris Rufo and many others. I mean, these are figures, again, that 10 years ago weren't around. We didn't have any analog to Chris Rufo, who was doing investigative, or John Seiler, or anybody at Manhattan who was doing investigative reporting about what's going on at universities. It was just ignorance, basically. And now
it was Bill O'Reilly talking about who was that guy, who was the sort of radical left a professor, something Ward, I forget. I remember watching Bill O'Reilly, and he would talk about some whacked out professor in like Washington State or something. Ward Churchill
with the 9/11.
Yeah.
Uh-huh.
Right. It's like, that was it. It was like,
we've always had again wacky professors. It's part of our charm, really, as universities. As you would go there and you'd see these characters that you couldn't encounter anywhere, especially else, and especially in the real world. But now, as we've started to sort of live with the consequences of a massive revolution in terms of the curriculum of higher education, we're starting to say, wait a minute now, what really is going on with our schools? Where's our tax money going? And as we start doing this again, there will be, I think, mounting pressure, and it's partly a political story. I will also say, we have this problem, which is the costs of education are going up, but the value of a degree is going down, and this
Yep.
has all sorts of perverse consequences. Again, you can link this to nearly any development you want, including Mondami's election in New York or
Hmm.
anything else, but because we have this disconnect between the cost and the value of a degree, we're also going to get a lot of demand for political oversight. Why are these degrees so expensive? Why are there so many administrators? Why are there so many bureaucrats? Why does everything cost so much? Again, why is education looking the way it is? And because these are fundamentally political and public projects, as you correctly point out, there needs to be accountability and oversight. And the faculty, again, we are an ivory tower institution. We view ourselves as removed from and above the society in which we exist. This is the crucial distinction. Most faculty members don't feel that they should be accountable in this way. But what we have to collectively decide is whether we want to defer to faculty members and their view that, again, they know best about how to run the university and therefore shouldn't be constrained, or whether we, in our role and capacity as taxpayers, want to start exercising some mechanisms of accountability. And then the question will become, how do we want to evaluate our universities? And again, I think the kind of holistic approach that we've tried to use with our ranking system can kind of start to serve as a model for that a little bit. These are all, I think, variables that would be interesting to policymakers as well as students and parents.
I think that it is almost certainly the case that the disconnection from actual accountability to anyone must be a primary source of these places of like Ward Churchill going from being like that fringe goof who might even have had interesting things to say, because it's neat to have that kind of professor. It can be fun if it's like, to being like, no, he's the median now. Like he is, if you go into a room full of sociologists and throw a dart, you will hit him. Yeah. He'll be considered moderate. He'd be like the guy who's now being called a right winger in the room full of sociology professors.
Yeah, that's exactly right. Look, the thing is, we, again, I'm serious. We do need intellectual and ideological diversity here. We need Ward Churchills. We need that person. But as you point out, we don't need an entire department of Ward Churchills, right? We don't need entire publicly funded universities filled with Ward Churchill. We don't need to mass produce Ward Churchills, right? And then put them in front of every 18-year-old in our society. And that's really, again, that's the shift that's happened. And that's what needs to be checked. And the question is, how can this best be checked? Again, I think there's some desire at this point for the federal government through the Trump administration to basically say, look, this has gone on too long. We're going to fix this. So you get the compact for higher education and so forth. There's some demand for the state legislature to, get their own house in order when it comes to their universities. And I would say there's a third way, again, represented in our rankings, which, students and parents get to make the decision ultimately about where they're going to go. And we have a lot of challenges confronting higher education, one of which is this demographic cliff that we're about to fall over the edge of as a result.
I just wanted to ask about this, so that's great, because as we sort of wrap up our conversation, we as we sit here, as I understand it, there's a demographic cliff. Our falling fertility means we have fewer kids, which means there is the demand for these schools in real terms. Even if everybody has all the money in the world to spend, there just aren't going to be enough students to occupy all these schools.
That's right. And I would add to that. So some work I've done. I look at there's this long running survey called Monitoring the Future. A lot of the data that we discussed earlier about external locus of control comes from Monitoring the Future data. A lot of the data about mental health for young people, but they also ask high school seniors every year, what do you want to do with your life? Do you want to graduate from a 4-year university? And so you can track this data over time. Now, The data over time shows that fewer and fewer and fewer students want to graduate from universities. That's no longer really one of the primary ambitions for high school seniors, and there are a lot of reasons for that. But
does it disentangle male and female respondents?
It does. So the
and
fascinating
how much of that is the entirety of the collapse the men?
It's even more nuanced than that. So the work I do is I break it apart by gender and partisanship. So you can ask people again, are you a conservative boy, Republican girls, liberal girls, Democratic girls. You can break it apart in that way again, which is what a lot of the work that some people have done to show, for instance, that the mental health crisis amongst young people begins with liberal girls first, right? And that's really where it's most prominent. So again, taking this question of what do you want to do? Do you want to graduate high school? What is shocking is you don't have to go back into ancient history to see there was no difference between girls always want to go to school more than boys. So you just start there. The baseline is slightly harder. So it's about 8 to 10 points, right? Girls want to go to college about 8 to 10 points more than boys. That's fine. But what's fascinating is the extent to which over the last really 15 years, this massive partisan gap has opened up. So if you go back to really 2010 and you look at the data, there's no difference between Democratic and Republican boys, independent boys. They're all the same. They all want to go to school. About 40% of them, about 80% rather, want to go to college. What happens in the last 15 years is that for independent and conservative boys, that number of people who want to go to college begins to plummet dramatically. So in the space of 15 years, that number is going to fully double. Now, what's shocking is it happens for girls too. Again, independent and Republican girls, their interest in going to college begins to decline. Liberal or Democratic girls, it's a flat line. And so what universities have managed to do in the space of 15 years is make their existing structural challenges connected with the demographic cliff far, far worse by alienating roughly 60% of young people from the idea of college. And again, this is a self-inflicted wound. There's partly a story here, of course, about realignment. And as the Republican Party has become more the party of working class kids, that's going to naturally move a little bit. But it would be basically foolish for a university to disregard the extent to which they're alienating a large part of their consumer base at precisely the moment where they can't afford to do that. So I would sort of point to that as, again, being a compelling reason for everybody involved in higher ed to start thinking very seriously about reforming ourselves in a way that's going to confront these longer term challenges that basically universities are going to have a hard time surviving in the absence of very serious action.
It's the feedback loops there are so powerful and frightening, actually, when you think about it, because you get into a world where, okay, so you've got 60-40 female to male, as I understand it right now, graduation rates across the board, but then even in places that wouldn't used to be the case, like medical school. Then you have the on average, generically true, if not in every circumstance, reality that women on average want to marry men of an equal or greater level of educational achievement and certainly income. And it's not hard to see why, like, family formation has gone down. And Charlie Kirk posted this graphic, before his death, showing a graph of the percentage of 30-year-olds who are both married and have are homeowners. And it's like roughly, I think it was like 60%, 50-60% until around 1990. And the collapse is such that by today it's below 15%, 15%.
Yeah.
And as a father and as an American, I look at that and I go, oh no. Like, oh no.
Right.
And I'm 48 years old. When I was 28 or 27, technically, like, my wife and I got married. We bought an apartment. We were very strapped. We were both working like crazy animals. It was a tiny place by today's standards, but we were on that ladder. And that's totally, that rug's been pulled for a whole bunch of reasons. And this seems like a super duper magnifier of it moving forward. And none of that's good for our society. No, all of that is horrible.
Yeah, I mean, you nailed it. I mean, I'm a father as well. I'm also 48, so we share that in common. But I think we want, for our kids, roughly the same kinds of things that we were able to have when we were young, and we want for our country a path forward that we just really don't think is available given these sort of trend lines that you're looking at. And again, I think there are many reasons why young people are sort of alienated from higher ed, just to speak narrowly, and it's actually reflective of a broader alienation towards American institutions. Using that same data that we talked about, you can track the trend lines, as I do in some of my writing, for how young people, high school seniors, feel about key institutions in American society. We're talking about churches, we're talking about public schools, we're talking about universities, we're talking about the military, we're talking about the media. You name the institution. You're talking about corporations, anything.
Yeah.
There is this vertiginous decline that begins again about 20.
There's an SAT word.
I just had.
What was that word? I don't know that
vertiginous.
word.
Yeah. I told myself that if I'm going to do this podcast, I got to get this off at least once. So I did it. So we can end any time now.
Vertiginous.
Yeah, it's a very steep decline.
Okay, Professor.
I got to tell you that I did earn the degree. It wasn't, it wasn't one of these fake degrees that I got. But there's this, again, shockingly steep decline in how young people have felt about these institutions. It's not just that they dislike higher ed, and it's not just that they've become skeptical of churches or established religion. It's not just that they're increasingly hostile towards the police or the military. It's all of those things, right? And and so I think everybody's kind of looking around and saying, what is at the root of this? What is we can obviously talk about the consequences. What does this look like in 20 years? But right now, what's underneath it? What is the sort of driving or compelling force that's leading so many people to reject established social institutions like marriage, like buying a home? Partly it's a story about cost, but again, we have all of these things going on. Some of them are stories about young men, but some of them are stories about young people more broadly. And obviously, we're as people who I think we were quite lucky. We were growing up in the 90s. I mean, I think
the peak of Western civilization, as I like to call it.
I think you're right. I share your fondness, but it's like, how do we get back to some of those? We're not ever going to go exactly back, but how do we get back to some of those some of those features of again, our society that we seem to have lost? And that's the $64,000 question, to use a reference from the 90s.
I ask this of every guest, first time guest. The show is called Dad Saves America because I think that that's a role we play as men that's really powerful, really important, really really meaningful, and it ripples out from our family, our kids, to our community, and to the country. And I think that we as men, as dads, can also play and need to play an important role in saving America and in guiding our kids to a path that's better. When we look at these trend lines, it's like, it's up to us, not alone. Our wives matter, but we are in a country that has 1 in 4 children being raised without a biological step or adoptive father. Those of us that are around, we've got a lot of work to do. So that's a role I think we play that's really important. Both as a father and more broadly, how do you think about your role in the American story?
Wow. Yeah, it's a small part, but I think important. I was among those people who didn't grow up with a father in the house. So, I think these are things I've thought longer about, maybe more carefully about. I sort of understand their significance, I think, in a deeply personal way. And as somebody who's become a father, I will say the act of becoming a father has been transformative for me. It's changed the way I think about my relationship to other people. It's changed the way I do my job. It's changed the way I think about the impact of my work. If I think about what my job can be is I would like to first and most narrowly restore the um, integrity of our institutions of higher education. Probably the best experience of my life, something that changed me in I would say, exclusively positive ways, was going away to college. I was a kid who I grew up. I didn't really go anywhere. I never traveled. I'd never really been out of my house. And at 17 years old, I got in my car and I drove away. And there were no cell phones. There was just no anything like this. And I found my way down to college, 500 miles away from my family. And um, the impact that it had on me, it was engaging and enlightening and invigorating and powerful and meaningful. And I met people I never thought I would meet in my life. And it's opened doors for me that I never thought would be opened. And I see my job now as being a professor as trying to pay that back a little bit by trying to salvage the promise of higher education, by trying to, again, in a small way at least, make sure that students today can go to a university and have the same experience that I had. And, more personally for me, again, it's I need to look after my kids. I need to be there for them, and part of the way in which I can be there for them is making sure that again, the educational opportunities that I had, which have transformed my whole life, are there for them too. I don't want them to have to attend a school while they're holding their nose. I don't want them to ever enter a classroom and feel pressures towards self-censorship, or I don't want them to feel insecure that they'll be rejected for who they are, what they believe. I want them to feel empowered and, again, confident that when they step into a classroom, that's going to be a positive experience and one that's going to open their eyes in ways they never really imagined. So I'm focused on those two things right now, and I'm trying to keep those those as my primary motivations. And there's only so much we can do alone, as you say. But
Yeah.
I think what's exciting about now is that although things seem quite dark, I would say the promise of this moment is that for the first time in a long time, there's, I think, the appetite and the will to actually try to shift the course of our country. So.
Well, I think those are noble, good things to strive for. And I encourage everyone to check out the college ranking system. We'll put a link down below. University of Florida, UT Austin, so many others. They're worth a look if this is the route you want to take for your kids. And Kevin, thanks for being on Dad Saves America. This was a lot of fun.
So much fun. Thanks, John.